Hello everyone, welcome to my Evil Within 2, Akumu difficulty, new upgrades, no keys walkthrough, and this is Chapter 13, Stronghold. So we're once again back in the Theodore District area, only it's undergone a significant change given that Theodore is now the main power in control of STEM. So there are a bunch of Lost, there are a bunch of Disciples, and there are a bunch of Harbingers around, and I'm actually going to take the time to kill these Harbingers because I wanted to get the flamethrower so I could demonstrate it in this walkthrough. And getting rid of the Harbingers isn't as bad as you think. In fact, they're definitely the strongest enemy type in the game. They're probably a lot stronger than the Guardians. I think they have a lot more life. Like, if you were to use your guns against Harbinger Liam, for instance, you would probably expend all of your ammunition. It's unbelievable just how much health the Harbingers have. And the reason why they give the Harbingers a lot of life is because you can actually get rid of them using stealth attacks. And that's what I'm going to use in order to get rid of these Harbingers. Because the last known position mechanic is really powerful against these enemies. And you're also going to be seeing just how powerful the bush mechanic is. Like, look at it. Like, it's not a solid object, but he just cannot hear me through the bush. Like, Harbingers can actually hear you while you're crouching, which is why they oftentimes turn around whenever you're behind them. But they just cannot hear me through the bush. It's insane. And furthermore, the bush is acting as if it's like a solid wall, in the sense that they just cannot see you through it. So even though I'm not inside of the bush, he's not seeing me through it. Like, typically, in most stealth games, if you're not directly inside of a bush, the enemies will always be able to spot you. They will just spot you through the bush, and it just doesn't make any sense. It works off a very binary system, but this game, the bushes work off an almost ternary-based system. So not only do you have the ability to hide inside of the bush and not be seen by the enemies, and there's also the moment where when you're outside of the bush and the enemies can see you, they will be able to spot you, but you have a third option in that you can place the bush between yourself and the enemy, and they will not be able to spot you. And I'm using that to my advantage. So, the strategy I use against the Harbingers is the exact same strategy I utilized against Harbinger Liam, where whenever I do the stealth attack on the Harbinger, I'm going to run away, generate a last known position, wait for him to run away, because he's always going to run away in the exact same direction, wait until he gets back into a neutral state, and then I'm going to run behind him, and then do the sneak kill on him, because he is very slow to turn around. And I'm going to do this on two Harbingers, because you need two flamethrower tanks in order to repair the flamethrower. And the good news is, on every single difficulty except for classic difficulty, whenever you kill the Harbingers, you get a checkpoint. So it'll save your progress, but I wanted to do this whole entire sequence up until Hoffman's safe house without having to restart the checkpoint, because I did die on the firewalk sequence. And by the way, this is honestly the hardest chapter in the whole entire game, and I honestly consider it to be the hardest chapter in the entire Evil Within series, because the firewalk section just demands a lot out of you, and you're in a very enclosed space, and the enemies are so good at hiding behind the flames, it's very hard to spot them, and they are very aggressive when they are trying to close in on you. I mean, it's good that they have less health, so you'll be able to use the pistol to your advantage when it comes to saving your other resources, but if you're not doing a very good job at keeping the spawns contained and under control, you're going to get swarmed so easily. And you need to have, like, shotgun shells, you need to have smoke bolts, you need to have a lot of pistol ammo if you want to survive that sequence. Because it's just very difficult. It's way harder than the burning house section from Chapter 6 of the first Evil Within. Or the cabin sequence from Chapter 10 of this game at the very beginning. Like, those sequences are nothing compared to the firewalk sequence. It's crazy. But we won't be getting to the firewalk section for a while, and that right there is a very dangerous attack, so as I mentioned before in Chapter 11, the Fireball is the most dangerous attack that the Harbingers have because it has a lot of range. The splash damage covers a lot of range, so you have to really make sure you're sprinting away from the Harbingers when they do that move. And this is the spot I use when I'm trying to kill this particular Harbinger, and I'm going to keep using my pistol to lure it over, and I'm just going to repeat the process, and it's just going to be the exact same strategy that I used for the first Harbinger. And overall, the beginning of Chapter 13, before the firewalk section, is a cakewalk, so long as you're using your resources intelligently, and as long as you're aware of the enemy spawns. So, I think during this time, I'm going to go on a different tangent, and I'm going to talk about a game that I played recently. So, I played a game recently called Yakuza Kiwami, because Seraphim17 had done a playthrough on his channel, and I've heard them express a lot of love for the Yakuza series. Now, I already feel like Serum17 loves a lot of games that are very overrated, given that he has a very outdated mindset when it comes to the games he likes. But I decided to give Yakuza Kiwami a chance, and after playing it for about 2 days, I completely deleted the game and got rid of my save file. I really didn't like that game. The combat on that game is so bad. Every animation you do feels very slow, and the dodge is completely useless in that game. Add that to the repetitiveness of the combat, and it just gets old very fast. And then with the enemies, like, they could do things that you yourself couldn't do. They always had phantom range on their attacks, and the game displayed no kind of intelligence with how it placed the enemies, and instead opted to just place so many enemies in narrow areas that would give them an advantage. Like, there was no thought to how it handled certain special enemy types. And then you got moments where you get knocked down by the enemies constantly whenever they had knives or guns. And when it comes to the guns on Yakuza Kiwami are incredibly unfair. It's the case with every single gun in the Yakuza series. Like, they're worse than Resident Evil 6's guns. And Resident Evil 6's gun enemies, like, if you have seen my live streams of Resident Evil 6 and you've seen the kind of things that the gunners are able to do on that game, they're just so bullcrap. But Yakuza Kiwami is just, like, taking the top spot for just having the worst guns I've ever seen in the game, by far. And due to the lack of intelligence with how the game handled its enemies, I had to either spam healing items or spam items in order to survive these miserable sequences. I'm sure based on that, you can understand why I look down on games that are designed around healing items, as designing games around healing items tends to lead to some of the most idiotic design choices ever, like what I've already listed with Yakuza Kiwami so far. And moving on to other issues, the enemies had impeccable tracking if you didn't use the dodge to evade, so that game is just so rigidly designed with how I want you to evade the enemies. And the animations that the enemies do are all just recycled from the older games. But that's just the thing Yakuza does overall. They like to reuse a lot of assets from previous titles and put them into their future games, so all you're really doing at that point is playing the same game, only it has a different name. It's not something new at all. You know, there are game series like Gears of War, or Silent Hill, or Call of Duty that favor very similar designs of just reusing the exact same assets that they used in previous titles, but just giving the game a new kind of title. It's so stupid. And then, going back to the other issues, there were several moments in the game where you had to do some seemingly random act or go to some random location in order to progress the main story. And it's like, you've been guiding me throughout the game. Why are you suddenly deciding to turn off a waypoint that could help me progress the story? Because Yakuza does utilize a waypoint system on the map, but it just disables it for no reason. Like, a great example of this is the sequence where you need to feed this stray dog, and for some reason, the game doesn't indicate where you need to go in order to get a paper plate, and it turns out you have to go near the bottom of the map and go into some store that conveniently happens to be selling paper plates. Like, there are a lot of weird instances like that where it just felt like padding, and that only served to make the game even more annoying. And I would like to discuss even more of these issues, but it would probably take me like 40 minutes just to discuss all these issues in like a short and concise way. And this is the Evil Within 2 right now, and I'm doing this walkthrough, so I'm not gonna dwell on it, but to sum it all up, like, Yakuza Kiwami is a pretty bad game, and the Yakuza series as a whole is just rehashing personified. Like, it only served to further reinforce why I just don't like fighting games a lot, because a lot of fighting games that I've played, they just favor such lazy designs. And they never ever feel different, they always feel very similar to each other. Like, Resident Evil 4 is able to stand out so greatly from third-person games, because every single design on that game is just innovative, but I haven't seen a single fighting game do something that feels very different to other fighting games in a way that feels very innovative, and actually feels like really good design. And I talked about this a little bit in my Last of Us walkthrough when I was on the Hunt chapter, so if you want to hear that, check it out. But overall, I just have to say that anyone who likes such series like Yakuza are just suckers, and they really don't require much to actually feel excitement for something. They're practically no different to the kind of people who can be scared so easily by horror games that favor very lazy design choices. Or even better, they're no different to the kind of people that can be scared so easily by mods like the Slender Man mod in Call of Duty Black Ops 3. Like, such a silly change is somehow incredibly scary for all these ignorant individuals who don't even know what horror is, or what to actually be afraid of. Like, are these people adults, or are they just babies? Like, I'd say they're babies, given that babies are scared of everything, and babies should never provide any critique on horror games whatsoever. So, I'll just conclude the tangent right there. Let's just return to the gameplay. So I've successfully crafted the flamethrower, and I'm also taking the time to do this little side activity with Sykes. The flamethrower, I'm not going to be using it until probably the final boss fight. Although I might use it for some earlier sections. Maybe the flamethrower is kind of useful against disciples, even if they are a fire-based enemy. But what you need to know about the flamethrower is that it has 99 fuel in total, and you're able to use gunpowder in order to craft fuel. And also, it is a very cumbersome tool to utilize because it slows your movement. I mean, it's not as cumbersome as the rocket launcher from the first Evil Within. Because on that game, you couldn't even move while you had the rocket launcher out. But on this one, you can actually move while you have the flamethrower. But it's just very slow when it comes to moving around with the flamethrower. And it covers quite a wide area, so you're able to hit multiple targets easily with the flamethrower. But there's never really a need to use the flamethrower, and the only time I use it is during the final boss fight, as I've already explained, and the reason why I use it for only the final boss fight is to get rid of the little spiders, because they can be a nuisance, and they can hit you a lot of times whenever you're in stomping animations. But at least you have the pistol and, like, freeze bolts as another substitute for the flamethrower when you're trying to deal with those spiders. What I can say, though, about the flamethrower is that it definitely has a lot more utility compared to the assault rifle, because the assault rifle is honestly the worst weapon in this game, because as is the core tenet with a lot of survival horror games, the machine guns are typically made very poorly to discourage you from spraying the whim. I mean, there are certain exceptions to this, like Resident Evil Revelations 2's assault rifle. It is really good, and with the upgrades, it's even better. And Resident Evil 3... the submachine gun on that game was really helpful. Resident Evil 2, the submachine gun on that game was very helpful as well. And with this game, it doesn't embrace that. It still makes the assault rifle incredibly useless, and there's no reason to use it. And it's such a shame because it's the assault rifle of Esmeralda Torres, the same person who abducted Sebastian's daughter. And you'd think that, you know, just wanting to honor her character so much, they'd make her assault rifle useful, but it sucks that it isn't that good. It's a big shame, but what can you do? But this is the firewalk section, and the first initial phase of the firewalk section isn't so bad. As long as you memorize the initial spawn, and as long as you're very quick on the draw when it comes to firing your weapons, it isn't so bad. But the parts where Hoppin is trying to repair the emitter, those are the parts that are incredibly difficult because the spawns on the enemies are completely random, and you have got to pay very close attention to how Sebastian reacts, and also pay close attention to the audio when it comes to understanding where the enemies are. So, most of the time, whenever the sequence starts, the first enemy will always be right in front of you, but after this point, it's going to be completely random, and this is where the smoke boat's going to come in handy, because as long as the smoke is active, the enemies will be stunned by the smoke. And you can also use your shock bolts as well in order to stun the enemies and open them up to being stomped. And be very careful that you do not get hit by the enemies while they're swiping at thin air, because it does do damage to you. And there's this final enemy. There's always going to be 4 enemies during these moments, so bear that in mind, and you'll know you're going to be safe. And the game is giving you an opportunity to get some resources. When you're moving with Hoffman, there are these crates that you can loot that will have shotgun shells or syringes. What a troll that would have syringes, but that's just the troll aspect of Akumu difficulty, which is why they didn't change it. They want you to feel very trolled by the fact that you are essentially getting an item that is completely useless on Akumu difficulty. But what can you do? But now this part right here, this is really where the firewalk section becomes very difficult. You have got to get incredibly lucky with the spawns right here. And like I said, you do have a lot of options at your disposal when it comes to dealing with the enemies, but you know, with not being able to predict where the enemies will spawn, it can be very dangerous. And that guy right there, most of the time he doesn't even come out of the ground, he just kind of comes from some debris. And because he's not in any kind of rising animation, he's able to close in on you very quickly. And then, once again, we have more of these random spawns. But just look at how hard it is to see these enemies at times. This is one of the trickiest aspects of the firewalk section, as I explained earlier. It's so hard to see the enemies when they're very far away from you. So overall, the random spawns, the decreased visibility, the lack of space, all of that together compounds into a very demanding sequence that is more demanding than any sequence in the Evil Within series by far. But I'm glad it's in the game. I really appreciate when these survival horror games put in these kind of sequences that demand the full assortment of your arsenal, and they actually feel like sequences that can happen in real life as well. Survival horror should account for all possible scenarios that could potentially happen. And that's definitely one aspect that Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 2 Remake and the older Resident Evil games failed to achieve, because they were always designed around knife only. And because it was designed around knife only with that in mind, like, the games really suffered because of that. There just wasn't a lot of effort put into those kind of games when it came to how they used the enemies or how they designed the mechanics. And it's just disappointing. I know a lot of people like the whole idea of knife only, thinking that it's a really cool concept, but when knife only is really the only way to make the games feel challenging, and doing it any other way just turns the game into New Game Plus, like, you can't really bring up the whole argument of challenge or impressiveness at that point when it's just your only option that actually feels very valid. But it's not those kind of individuals that really piss me off. It's the kind of individuals that try to do knife only in games like Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6, and they somehow consider that impressive. Like, those people really piss me off because they think the whole idea of just having a completely unpolished, broken, and dragged out game is anything to be impressed by. Such runs on those kind of games just completely break the pacing of the game. So when restricted runs break the games in a way similar to that, that's hardly what I would consider a proper restricted run. And it just demonstrates a misunderstanding as to what true difficulty really means. But that's to be expected when a lot of these people just take their games for granted and they just succumb to the temptation so easily, and that's something I really try to avoid doing in my games. I try to avoid succumbing to the temptation of turning the games into just unfinished games just to accommodate some kind of inner desire in me. That's why I always return to these games with a very fresh mindset, so that I'm not succumbing to that temptation whatsoever. And just to relate this whole idea to the Evil Within series, I regret ever doing my handgun/consumable only run of the Evil Within 1, because I really turned that game into a slogfest, and I really made the game feel very broken and just unpolished and unfinished, and it just looks so messy. I really hate myself for ever doing that run, and I was originally planning on doing a very similar run in Evil Within 2, but having just been enlightened to just how pathetic having a mindset like that is, I'm not going to be doing such a run in Evil Within 2, because all it will do is just demonstrate that I feel the Evil Within 2 is a game I will take for granted, and I just don't appreciate the value of what they put in with this game. And if I go down that path, I'll be no different to a drug addict looking for a fix after having developed a tolerance. Like, that's the best analogy I can give when it comes to describing these kind of individuals who like doing such runs like kill-all runs, for instance. But enough about that. This has been Chapter 13. Stay tuned for the future parts. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.